Okay, so something big just happened in the US-China tech war. On the surface, it looks like a simple pause, a truce. But if you look just a little closer, you'll find a high-stakes geopolitical chess match, a secret backroom deal, and a ticking clock counting down to a potential explosion. We're going to break down what's really going on with the 2027 Reprieve.
So yeah, the big question is, was this really a ceasefire? The official story is that some tariffs got delayed. But as we're about to find out, the reality is, oh, it's so much more complicated and frankly, way more interesting than that. And that brings us right to this central puzzle here. I mean, think about it. Why would the US spend over a year investigating China's semiconductor industry, decide it's a major threat, and then just hit pause? It doesn't quite add up.
All right, so here's the core fact that got everyone talking. On December 23rd, 2025, the US announced that these massive new tariffs everyone was expecting on Chinese chips, well, they were being kicked down the road for a full 18 months, all the way to June 2027. This was a huge surprise. But how they did it, that's the real story.
See, they used this really clever legal trick. This wasn't a cancellation. No, they legally activated the tariff, but they set the rate at 0%. It's a brilliant and, let's be honest, a pretty menacing move. It means the legal switch is already flipped. Come 2027, they don't need a new investigation or a new law. They just have to turn the dial up from 0 to, well, whatever they want.
So let's be crystal clear here. This reprieve is not a white flag. It's not a sign of peace. It's a loaded gun pointed right at the global supply chain with the safety set to click off in June 2027. And that just begs the question, why? Why do it this way?
And that right there is where we get to the real heart of the story, the hidden deal. Turns out, this wasn't just a random decision by the US, it seems to be part of a very fragile, unwritten trade-off that is quietly shaping the entire global economy as we speak.
And here's where the pieces of the puzzle just start to click into place. The timing is it's too perfect to be a coincidence. Right as the US hits pause on chip tariffs, what does China do? It suddenly suspends its own export controls on critical minerals. The very stuff the West desperately needs for everything from fighter jets to EV batteries. This screams backroom deal.
So let's just break down this quid pro quo. This you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The US gets its hands on vital minerals, avoiding what could be a catastrophic supply chain crisis for its defense and green energy industries. And in return, China gets a precious 18-month window to sell its chips to the world, tariff-free, bringing in billions of dollars to fund its own tech dream. But, and this is a huge but, there's a fatal flaw baked right into this truce, a vulnerability that makes the whole thing a tinderbox. The timelines don't line up. The US tariff delay is for 18 months, but China's promise to keep the minerals flowing, that only lasts for 12 months. This mismatch makes the entire deal incredibly unstable and gives the US a whole lot of leverage down the line. So what do you think happens when you put a giant tariff cliff 18 months in the future? You get chaos. You get a global stockpiling panic. Let's dig into the immediate and kind of wild consequences of this hidden deal.
People are calling this phenomenon the rush to buy, and it's really just simple economics. I mean, if you run a car company and you know the price of a critical chip might jump by 50% in a year and a half, what do? You buy 2, maybe 3 years worth of inventory right now while it's still cheap. You're shifting from just in time to just in case.
And the evidence for this rush is already pouring in. Just look at China's top chip maker, SMIC. They reported a factory utilization rate of nearly 96%. Now, in the chip world, anything over 90% is basically considered completely maxed out. And they're doing this while the rest of the global chip market is actually in a slump. The rush is definitely on. And of course, what happens when your factories are running 24/7 and desperate customers are lining up to secure supply before that deadline? You get pricing power. SMIC reportedly jacked up prices by about 10%. That just goes to show you how desperate the demand is right now. And this effect just ripples through the whole supply chain. If SMIC is running flat out, they need more machines to make the chips. And since US export controls block them from buying American tools, they have to turn to domestic suppliers like Narura Technology. And look at that, their revenue skyrocketed by over 42%. They are the secondary winners in all this, and maybe the biggest. So, who's cashing in on this controlled chaos? Well, the table here shows two clear groups. First, you've got the foundries themselves, like SMIC and Hua Hong. They're running at full capacity with guaranteed orders for the next 18 months.
But the real long-term winners might actually be the equipment makers, like NARA and AMEC. They're not just selling more tools for a short-term rush, they're riding a massive government-funded wave to build out China's entire domestic chip industry from the ground up.
But this isn't just about short-term profits. This 18-month window has kicked off an absolutely frantic, high-stakes race against time for both the United States and China. You've basically kicked off two parallel races with two completely different goals. China is taking all that cash from the rush to buy and plowing it into building its own sanctions-proof chip industry. At the exact same time, the U.S. is using this period of calm to frantically move its own supply chains back home so that it won't even need Chinese chips after 2027.
But China's grand plan has this one massive risk, and it goes by this incredible name, zombie fabs. The fear is that China will spend hundreds of billions of dollars building these gigantic, state-of-the-art factories, only to find out they can't fully operate. They might have 80% of the tools they need, but if they're missing that final, critical piece of the puzzle that's blocked by U.S. sanctions, these multi-billion-dollar factories become useless. They become zombies.
And don't think for a second that the U.S. is just sitting back and watching this happen. At the exact same time they announced the tariff delay, they quietly added 140 new Chinese companies to their export blacklist. The strategy is pretty clear. Delay the tariffs that hurt your own consumers, but double down on the export controls that create those zombie fabs and hamstring China's long-term goals. So all of this, the secret deal, the stockpiling panic, this crazy race against time, it's all hurtling towards one single critical date on the calendar.
This timeline really just lays out the collision course we're all on. First, in November 2026, China's side of the bargain, that flow of minerals, is set to expire. That's going to be the first major test of this whole truce. Then, just 7 months later, we hit the cliff itself, June 2027, the day the U.S. can turn that tariff dial from 0 to, well, wherever it wants. And honestly, this quote from the source material just sums it all up perfectly. This isn't peace, it's a gray zone. It's a strategic pause where both sides are basically reloading, rearming, and getting ready for the next phase of the conflict. The war never stopped, it just went underground. Which leaves us with the ultimate question as we're all staring down that 2027 cliff. Both the US and China are making massive billion-dollar bets during this 18-month window. The geopolitical chessboard is set. The only real question is, when that clock finally runs out, who played their hand better?